Hey there and welcome back to another Star Wars video. And recently we saw the release of the latest addition to the Star Wars animated roster, Tales of the Jedi, which is a collection of short episodes that serves to flesh out the world and characters of Star Wars, especially the characters of Ahsoka Tano and Count Dooku, across 6 episodes, 3 for Dooku and 3 for Ahsoka, exploring character motivations, world building, and tying up loose ends from the films that have never been properly addressed before. And yeah, so whilst overall I'd say the series was very fun and enjoyable to watch, not all the episodes are of the highest quality, at least in terms of their storytelling. They could be hit or miss at times, especially when you divide them into the Count Dooku storyline and the Ahsoka storyline. Dooku's episodes were good to great. They took a character who, if you only watch the films and shows, is a pretty stock standard mustache twirler of a villain. He talks some tremendous shit in Attack of the Clones about how he wants to forge a better world, but then he's very generic in the Clone Wars TV show and is an evil archetype. And then he dies pretty much straight away in Revenge of the Sith after getting betrayed by Darth Sidious, so he never really gets to show off any of that interesting side of his character. The more grey morality, the political idealism, the reason that he went dark in the first place and turned against the Jedi, people he'd grown up alongside. It was basically the only life and culture he'd ever known, and he turned away from it. How do you go from that to becoming a deranged Sith Lord who plunged the galaxy into a massively destructive war that ended up killing millions for no real reason at all? It pretty much goes against all those grand ideals that he had. So throughout Dooku's episodes, this is what's explored. How does he get lured to the dark side? What are his motivations? Who does he care about? And you see that slow descent, and it's very compelling, and it ends up really enhancing the story that's already been told for Dooku in the films and shows, and it makes his arc all the more tragic. It's much like how Anakin starts off with good intentions to save his family, and so he pursues dark power, only to become the architect of its fall. And so now, Dooku's story becomes a tale of a Jedi who was dissatisfied with what he saw in the galaxy. How the Senate was corrupt and filled with people that were just out for themselves and pursued their own agendas, instead of working for the greater good of their own planets. He saw that the Jedi had essentially become lapdogs to the Senate, unwilling to go against the status quo and becoming bound by rigid ideals and dogmas. And so he sets out to make change. But in the end, he simply becomes more of the same, the very thing he'd set out to fight against. And that's all super great storytelling. Everything about his episodes was great. And honestly, I wish they'd done 6 episodes of his story. But gotta shoehorn in Ahsoka, I guess. And the Ahsoka episodes, it's not that they were bad, but at the same time, they were just comparatively far less compelling as a whole. Instead of having that core storyline, they felt like they were just snapshots in the life of Ahsoka. Her as a baby, her as a Padawan during the Clone Wars, and then her in hiding after the fall of the Order. The first 2, they didn't feel like they added much to her character or to her story. And the third, well, it was decent, but at the same time it felt like it was missing something. It would be like if they'd only used one of the Dooku episodes and made the other 2 just filler. That's how it felt. I think I would have preferred if all of Ahsoka's stories dealt with her being the disenfranchised character in hiding, who slowly comes back into her own and joins up with Bail Organa in the end. Because then, it kind of serves as a contrast to Dooku's own story, who starts off as the Jedi Master, and who slowly becomes disenfranchised with the Republic and the Jedi Order, until eventually, he rises again as a Sith. Plus, on top of all of that, besides that contrast, it would have also just given Ahsoka a defined arc over the course of the series. The snapshots just didn't work for me. And so yeah, those are my more general thoughts on the show itself. It was very good, and even the Ahsoka episodes were fun, for the most part. But ultimately, it felt like either just make it a full Dooku show, or try to tie the Ahsoka episodes together a bit more. But anyway, now I think I'll go through the episodes in a little bit more depth. Okay, so episode 1, Life and Death. It shows the birth of Ahsoka, and how when her mother took her out on a ritual hunt, she ended up being kidnapped by some giant tiger thing. And of course, this giant tiger thing did not immediately eat the tiny baby, because, plot armor. And then he was charmed by her and delivered her back home when it realized that she's force sensitive. And honestly, I was not a fan of this episode. I did not care about her parents. We all know she's force sensitive. Does she need some big epic story for this to be proved? Does every single moment of her life need to be absolutely epic? I get that Filoni loves this character, but by God, this episode was such a miss for me. I mean, they had the opportunity to do some world building here as well, and they hardly even explored it, and they hardly even explored the culture of her people. That might have been the only redeeming feature if they've done it, but they didn't, and so yeah, I'm not a fan of this episode. The other Ahsoka episodes do have their moments, but this one just doesn't for me. Next up is Justice, which shows Dooku and his Padawan Qui-Gon making their way down to a planet to investigate the kidnapping of the son of a senator in a rural village. And it seems like originally it's going to be a classic kidnapped by unreasonable bandit scenario and the Jedi are just going to destroy them. Only things aren't what they seem. It turns out the senator is deeply corrupt, to the point that even his son, who's been kidnapped, is against him now. There's a shootout, Dooku intervenes, and he uses the dark side to choke the senator until Qui-Gon pulls him back. And besides the actual episode just being fun and compelling, it was also quite interesting as it fleshed out a number of things. For one, it showed us the bond between Dooku and Qui-Gon, which hasn't really been explored all that much in major media, and seems to be very parental. On top of that, it also feels like Qui-Gon's probably the only Jedi that ever truly understood Dooku and his feelings. And you can see that he took a lot away from their relationship. Hell, Qui-Gon just feels like light side Dooku, if you strip away those dark side leanings. And on top of that, the episode also starts to plant the seeds that Dooku's wholly unwilling to be a puppet of the Senate, and he feels like the Jedi should not do their bidding, but instead work towards a greater good for the galaxy. And this theme is followed up on perfectly in the next episode, Choices, which chronicles Dooku and Master Windu arriving on Raxus Secundus to recover the body of a slain Jedi Master, and uncovering a conspiracy against the planet's senator. But as they dig deeper, they discover the reason behind everything. That once again, a senator was corrupt and exploiting the people that they pledged to serve, and thus the guards turned against him and intended to force him to pass legislation that would benefit them and the people. The Jedi's death was simply collateral damage. Our two Jedi are then ambushed, the senator is killed, and they arrest the perpetrators. But instead of being celebrated, Dooku's kind of scorned for getting a senator killed and interfering beyond his Jedi mandate. Whereas Windu, who wanted to go home and not even investigate the death of a fellow Jedi, is celebrated and rewarded with a council position, which seems to have been continually denied over the years to Dooku, which just further disillusions him in regards to both the Republic, the Senate, and the role of the Jedi Order within him. You can see that doubt, the resentment, the anger, and it starts to unveil how Palpatine would have been able to work his way into Dooku's confidence and start to twist him towards the dark side and towards darker and more violent ideals. And then all of this culminates in a really epic final chapter where Dooku turns to the dark side fully. When he starts off this episode, well, he's already fallen somewhat. I'm pretty sure he's already killed Cypher Dyas, and deleted Kamino from the Jedi Archive memory to hide the existence of the upcoming clone army for as long as he can. You can see that the disillusionment is in full effect, but he still isn't completely gone. He's frustrated that the Council's not taking the threat of the Sith more seriously. He knows by this point that it's real, that Palpatine and Maul and probably Pelagius are all currently alive. And I guess he's still somewhat playing both sides. He hasn't fully committed to the Sith. Because we see that he deeply grieves when he gets word of the death of Qui-Gon and angrily goes to confront Sidious about what's happened. But on the flip side, as we see when he's standing by the tree mourning his surrogate son, he also heavily blames the Jedi Council for what's happened because they've been so rigid and stuck in their ways, never bothering to think outside the box and try things differently. What the Council says goes, and don't think for yourself. And thus, even though his ally ended up having Qui-Gon killed, and whilst that angers him, he still inevitably slays Master Yaddle in an emotional confrontation where she tries to pull him back towards the light. He's too far gone, too bitter towards the Jedi Order. He can't be saved at that point. And also, that fight itself was epic. I enjoyed it quite a lot, and I like that they wrapped up Master Yaddle's arc. And thus, you sort of see this fall of Count Dooku through that 3-episode arc, starting with the temptation to use the dark side for good, seeing the hypocrisy and weakness of the Senate and the Jedi Council, all the way to cutting ties with the Jedi to join the Sith after the death of his former apprentice. It's just a really well-constructed arc that fleshes out and explores his character in a lot more depth, and really made him feel so much more three-dimensional. Whilst he clearly becomes evil, he doesn't start out that way. He's not just a pure mustache twirler. He had reasons behind what he did, and good intentions. But as always in Star Wars, they became corrupted. And so, that ended the Dooku arc. Once again, I do really wish the whole thing was 6 Dooku episodes, because the Ahsoka ones that followed, they just weren't it. The second Ahsoka episode, Practice Makes Perfect, is basically just Anakin teaching Ahsoka how to block attacks from multiple targets at multiple angles. That's it. It explains how she got so strong so quickly, as his training methods are intense and kind of harsh, and it further fleshes out what kind of teacher he was. The type that's unyielding and basically strives for perfection, using extreme practices to forge Ahsoka into a great warrior. And yeah, it was fun to see that, but at the same time, I don't know if it was really needed. For me, this almost felt like too much explanation. You could easily read between the lines to see what type of teacher Anakin would have been. So yeah, that was another miss for me. And because those first 2 volumes of the Ahsoka storyline were pretty weak and disconnected, the actual interesting part, where Ahsoka turns down Bail Organa's offer to work alongside him as a proto-rebel and tries to live a quiet life, it doesn't quite hit the same. Her story in the 3rd episode felt very rushed. She doesn't want to fight, so she goes into hiding. Then she's a farmer, she gets betrayed, the Inquisitor comes and kills basically everybody in the town, and then she destroys the chump in like 2 hits, and suddenly she's ready to be a freedom fighter again. Honestly, the story itself was fine, but I think it really needed those 2 other episodes alongside it. Make it so she sees what the Empire's doing to the common folk of the galaxy. Let her see that inaction is everywhere, and somebody needs to stand up to protect them. But she refuses. She's riddled with doubt and fear and angst. But then the village massacre happens, the death of her friends on that planet, and it spurs her on, and thus she joins up with Bail like we know she does in canon. But yeah, they didn't do that. And so, whilst Tales of the Jedi was mostly good, especially Dooku, God, I need a Dooku show now, please, I don't think overall it quite lived up to the hype or expectations. Ahsoka, once again, felt very shoehorned in. But maybe that's just me. But anyway, with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Tales of the Jedi? You like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.